I want to continue on this short series that I'm doing about raising up a godly generation. And today I want to look at a different character in the Bible. Last week we looked at Joseph, and I think we all kind of heard, but he was about 17 years old when he was taken into captivity, and the character that he had. This morning I want to talk about Esther, and there's a whole book with her name in the Old Testament. But the funny thing is that she only comes out in a few chapters. There's a lot of other stuff that goes on. But Esther, let me just give you a little bit of background, and then I'm going to read the passage to you. This book is about the sovereignty of God. It's about the sovereignty of God. Cody's Korean's good. It's about the sovereignty of God. And what I mean by the sovereignty of God is when you read the book of Esther, it's one of the two books in the Bible that never mention God. Did you know that? It's kind of weird, right? There's 66 books, these shorter books that are contained in the Bible, and 64 of them mention God, that word God, in some way, shape, or form. But Esther is one of the books that never mentions God. It actually mentions, I always get messed up with his name. I'll use the other name. King Xerxes, 170 some odd time. And he's called King Esther. I can't even pronounce it right now. My tongue is not working today very well. He's the most mentioned name. Esther is not even mentioned nearly as much as him. So when you read the story of Esther, there's a whole historical context to it, and it's very interesting. And I'm a history buff, and I like history. I don't remember facts and names and dates very well, but the themes and stories. So I'm going to tell you the background of this, and hopefully I'm not going to lose too many of you. But the amazing thing about the book of Esther is that there's a plot to wipe out the Jews. There's an anti-Semitic movement in this kingdom of Persia that the Jews were one of the ethnic groups within. And this Agagite guy that's a high official in this kingdom wants to wipe them all out. He wants to wipe out all of God's people in that kingdom. And he actually literally wants to go back to Israel and Jerusalem and wipe them all out there too. That's how powerful the Persian kingdom was. And he was rising rapidly in the Persian kingdom, and that's what he wanted. And this is the plot that he hatched. And I'll tell you why. Because he has deep-rooted hatred towards them because they have a history. The Jews and his people. But in the midst of all of this, there's this pivotal thing that happens. And somehow the plot is uncovered, and somehow there's another character, two Jewish characters actually, Mordecai, the uncle, the cousin of Esther, who raises Esther because at her early childhood, she becomes an orphan. Her parents die, and she's the only child. And so he adopts her and raises her up like his daughter. And so when the Bible says cousin, and I'm sorry, but it's one of the few times I didn't have enough time to go back and study it enough, but I couldn't tell, I couldn't go deeply enough to realize if he's actually the uncle or cousin. I know in some cultures, we say uncle and cousin, and it's a different level, but most cultures, they say, this is another level of relationship. So a third, fourth, fifth cousin could be an uncle. Does that make sense? That's why this word cousin is used in the Bible. And so he raises her, so we don't know if he's literally a generation older or in the same generation, but just older. I don't know. Okay, I'm just telling you that. Go do some research on your own, okay? And find out. But what happens is that he raises her up, and he finds out about this plot, and he tells Esther, who by divine providence becomes the queen of all of this land, and he tells her, you need to go tell the king, otherwise our people will be wiped out. And so she goes in after praying and fasting to the king and tells him. Now that sounds like very unremarkable, right? And you're like, okay, she's the queen. She goes talk to her husband. Hey, this guy's trying to kill me and all my family members and all the Jewish people. Stop it. And you would think all of that would work out pretty well, right? I mean, that's the basic story in a nutshell. That's the Sunday school story that you usually would get. But now, today, you're going to get the R-rated, the real, adult version. So some of you are a little bit younger in your mindset. Okay, just be ready, okay? I'm not going to be graphically gory, but you're going to get the R-rated version. You're not going to get the Sunday school version. Now, King Xerxes, the guy that comes out here, well, actually, let me read the passage to you, the pivotal point, because this is how God uses Esther in his sovereign will to save the people of Israel. In Esther chapter 4, verse 12, beginning there, I just want to read a little bit to you. And this is picking up where Mordecai tells his niece, his daughter, in a sense, Esther, this guy's trying to wipe out the people, and he sends a message to her in the palace because he can't go into the palace. And the messenger comes back and says, well, she knows that, but did you know that if she goes into the presence of the king without him asking her to come, the law is that everybody dies who comes into his presence without being beckoned. Unless he's in a good mood and he extends his golden scepter, and then by grace you're not killed, but he says, what do you want? But we know from outside sources the majority of people were executed for that kind of thing, and so people didn't go into his presence unbeckoned. So she sends the message back, Dad, Uncle, whatever you want to call Mordecai, I don't know if you knew this, but this is what will probably happen to me if I went in there. And he responds back, and here's his response beginning in verse 12. And they told Mordecai what Esther had said. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Let me pause there for a second. If you don't go into the king and save our people, or potentially try, I know that God's going to save us in some other way. But you're going to miss out on your opportunity to be used of God. And then he continues on and says, who knows whether you have not come into the kingdom, become queen for such a time as this. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go gather all the Jews to be found in Susa, that's that local area, that capital city, and hold a fast on my behalf, and do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I want to just pause there for a second because fasting is so foreign to us. I've fasted for extended periods of time. But I've never done a water fast for 3 days. I fasted for 3 weeks. I fasted, going without food, And after about 2 weeks, you're not even hungry. Did you guys know that? So if any of you, it's not a healthy way to lose weight, so that's not the thing, okay? It's just not, but it's a good way to cleanse, And you save so much time. Especially if everybody's fasting in your family, but my girls wouldn't be. But you don't have to cook, you don't have to do dishes, you don't have to think about going to the grocery store. You're just drinking water all day. That's all. It's easy. But fasting for 3 days without eating, no big deal. Seriously, all of you can go through it. The only thing is by the second or third day, you're gonna have a severe headache. That's what happens for most people. But not drinking for 3 days is very, very, very difficult. For 72 hours, it's really, really hard. I'm a person that drinks like 64 to 80, ounces of water a day. I just drink a lot of water. And you guys already can kind of tell, the way I preach is very, very liquidy. The podium is always I just can't help it. So I try to really be, down and not when I converse with you directly, not to baptize you. But anyway, it's incredibly difficult. And she says, let's all do this together. And then she says, I and my young women will fast as you do. She's the queen. She says, I'll do the same thing. And then I will go to the king, though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. It's a famous passage. Mordecai then went away and did everything that Esther had ordered him. It's interesting, huh? She orders her dad. But anyway, that's just my own thing because I have 2 girls. They order me all the time. The thing I want to point out to you this morning is this. And the reason why I said R-rated is because if you know the history, it's kind of crazy. So all of you, let me just start a little bit back in history. And you all know about how the Jews originally were slaves in Egypt. And this is, Joseph was in Egypt and he saved all his family. And they all came to live in Egypt. But eventually the kings, the pharaohs, forgot about Joseph and all that they had done. And so they looked at these Jews that were growing and growing in number. And said, soon there's going to be more of them than us. And so we have to enslave them and dominate them so that they won't have a rebellion and become masters in our own country. People, you know what's amazing when you read the Bible? These similar kinds of racial tensions and situations are happening in the world today. Italy and France and America. It's big news to us right now. There's lessons to be learned. I'm not going to go off, that's a whole other sermon, but so that was what was going on. And so afterwards, when those Jews were being oppressed, they cry out to God, they remember their gods, they stop worshiping the false idols of the Egyptians, and then they get taken out, and Moses leads them out. At least we all kind of know about Moses and how he leads them out. If at the very least you saw the Charlton Heston movie with the Ten Commandments and partying, and if you go to Universal Studios, there's that ride where you go, and it's that cheesy water. I mean, when I first saw it, I was like, yeah, wow, But now, we have too much CG and everything, so it's not a big deal. But at the time when they came out, there was a powerful people in the land that they were going towards, on their journey towards the promised land. There was a people that said, oh, we don't like you walking across our land, and we're going to battle you, we're going to destroy you. And so this huge army of the Amalekites came to battle the Jews. And at that time, God, delivered them, but he said, this people are going to be cursed because they attacked you. That's the first thing that I want you to know. And then fast forward about another 500 years, and then the first king, King Saul, this is the first king of the Israelites. Okay, I can't go into all the story, otherwise you guys are going to be bored and we're going to be here for hours and hours. But King Saul has a battle with the Amalekites once the Jewish nation is established. I don't know, I hope I'm not losing some of you, but he goes and fights, and guess who he fights against? The Amalekites. And God says, because they attacked the Israelites when they were coming out of Egypt, I want you to fight, when you defeat them, I want you to leave not one of them. I know it sounds incredibly harsh, but basically God says just wipe them all out. Because that's what I said back then. That was their punishment. That was their judgment. And one thing that I want to point out to you from the Old Testament, when God seems incredibly harsh, you have to understand, because God is dealing with sin. God is dealing with sinful people that don't change. Let me explain to you. You think God is just like wiping people out and he's doing genocide? What he's doing is, from the time of the Amalekites, where they first attacked in Egypt, and then another 500 years or more, all of that time was given before the curse of wiping them out was done. Isn't that interesting? They were given hundreds of years to repent. And they didn't. And he said, finally, I can't bear it any longer. And so King Saul is the agent and the instrument. Unfortunately, he is a tarnished instrument. And when he goes to fight them, instead of wiping out everything, and God said, kill all the people, kill all the cattle, don't take any plunder. We're just going to burn everything. It'll be like as if they never existed. But then his men start seeing women. Sorry, back then that was part of the spoils of war. They see cattle. They see jewelry, gold, valuable things. They start taking, and King Saul can't really stop them. He doesn't have the leadership. He doesn't have the fortitude to say, no, it's not what God wants. And he actually lets the king of the Amalekites, now listen to his name, Agag, or Agag, I don't know, whatever you want to pronounce it. A-G-A-G, live. Fast forward to the book of Esther, another 500 years. The guy that wants to wipe out the Jews is an Amalekite, and he's of the line of the Agagites. And so if you read Esther, it says Haman the Agagite, and it keeps saying that again and again and again. And this is why we need to know the context, because when you read the book of Esther, you go, oh, okay. Now here's the other thing that I want you to know about the king at that time. So that's the first character, Haman. And Esther and Ruth, Mordecai and Esther we were talking about. I don't know, I always get Ruth. I always want to talk about Ruth, but Esther. And then we have King Xerxes. I'm just going to use this easier name. That's the king of Persia. If you know a little bit about history, I'm not a amazing scholar in history, but I like reading history because there's a lot to be learned. One of the first major empires was the Persian Empire. So what happened with the Jews and Israelites was that they were actually one of the first major powers, that we kind of know about. Then there was the Babylonian Empire that God used to punish the Israelites because they turned away from worshiping him. And so what happened is that the Babylonians took them into captivity, but then the Persian Empire rose up and overcame the Babylonians before the Jews were returned back to their own people. And so Xerxes' father is Darius, and Darius' father is Cyrus. And King Cyrus is mentioned in the Bible, and he's the one that says, after 70 more years of you Jews being slaves in the Persian Empire, as you were under the Babylonian Empire, you may go back. And Nehemiah, okay, I'm going way all over the place, but the book of Nehemiah, if you look further down in the book, is about the time of Ezra and Nehemiah when King Cyrus allowed them to go back and rebuild Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem, and they're reestablished as a nation. So you say, what all of this have to do with Esther? Okay, I feel like I'm back in school. There's an important reason. And there'll be actually a fun here, and then we'll get to the R-rated part soon. So what happens with King Cyrus is that he restores, but some of the Jews don't go, not all the Jews go back. Now think about this. It's very important for us to understand. And I don't mean this in any kind of racist kind of way, but if you think about it, Africans were brought into the United States as slavery from Cuba and from Haiti and different places and from South and also directly into the United States hundreds of years ago, and they were brought as slaves, right? So as soon as they were emancipated and then started getting more freedom, they didn't all go like, let's all get on a boat and go back to Africa and find our roots. They didn't do that. Some did, but very much small minority. And so that's why Mordecai and Esther are still in Persia. Do you understand? Even though they were treated poorly, or even though they were originally slaves, they say, well, now we have a future here. Now we're like all the other ethnic groups in the Persian Empire. That's how these empires kept the different nationalities and cultures. The Roman Empire did it, the Greek Empire did it. They let them have their own religions, they let them have their own language, their own culture, and that's how they kept them there. And it was the most powerful, prosperous place to be, so why would you want to go back to Israel? And you can stay in the Persian Empire. So a lot of them, and I don't think God said, why aren't you going back to Israel? He didn't command them all to go back. He did command Nehemiah and a few others to go back and build up that country. God actually even used the Babylonian, the Persian captivity to bless. Why? He wants other nations to know about him. You guys understand? So ultimately, the book of Esther is about God, God's sovereignty, God's glory, God declaring himself to every powerful nation, saying, you may think you're all powerful, you may think you're the most amazing king that ever lived, but you too will pass. This is one of the kind of the comfort I have in this presidential election. I told my daughter, I don't like either candidate. I'm sorry, I don't like getting political and whatnot. I voted already, I voted by mail, all that stuff, but the comfort I have is that no president, no king, no powerful businessman or anybody is going to do anything that will thwart the plan and the sovereignty and purpose of God. Go out and vote if you haven't, and if you're able to. Please vote. Don't not vote. It's our responsibility. But we don't know if God will use our actions, our behavior, our life to impact and do his will. Mordecai says, if you don't do it, God will find somebody else. It's not like he's like, oh man, I can't do my plan because so-and-so's not going to do this. No, that's not the way God works. So you need to take every opportunity to do what you can, to do what's right. But you also have to know, I take comfort in this, even if I make a mistake, as long as it's good intention, God can overcome that. It's not like, oh my gosh, God, I made a mistake and I screwed up your whole plan. Sorry. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. But if you're in his will, you can be a pivotal piece of his plan, of what he wants to do. That's the reason. And that's what all these stories are about. And I want to raise up men and women. I want you to be. I want our children to be. I want that generation to be people who are used by God and are pivotal in doing the work and the will of God. So, here's the argument part. I'm like carried in a string right now. But so King Xerxes, you have to understand one more thing about him. He's crazy. You have to understand how crazy he is. You guys know the story about King Darius is the one that first started battling with the Greeks. Okay, now here's where it comes in. You guys, most of you probably saw the 300. The Spartans, well, they're Greeks. The Athenians, they're Greeks. They're all city-states. They're all independent. But when the Greeks come together, it was really a proven fact, because when they finally came together, because the Persian Empire kept battling them, Darius was battling them, but he couldn't quite win. He actually, according to ancient sources, brought 1 million soldiers against the Greek people and overcame and took Athens and the Athenians. He conquered them. But then when his soldiers kind of left, they rose up and they chased out and they defeated him. And he had more defeats than victories. And they were always a thorn on his side. And so he decided, I'm going to go and completely wipe them out. And right before that, he died. So his son, Xerxes, is now the one that is going to do it. And so he amasses 250,000 people and all these things. And so Esther is exactly in that time. And he's frustrated in this battle. And he's so frustrated because the Spartans with 300, it's a true story, are wiping out or holding his army at bay. He's frustrated because he has 300 ships loaded up, and a small Greek fleet wipes out all 300 ships. He's frustrated because he built a bridge, another way to cross the gap so that his soldiers, his massive soldiers, his power can be brought. The problem is that getting to Greece was hard, and they kept getting funneled, and they couldn't bring their whole force to bear. And so he built these bridges across a small isthmus to get across, but a storm comes and wipes it out. So he gets so crazy, you know what he does? Find me every engineer that built those bridges. And he said, cut off all their heads. And then he says, take thousands upon thousands of soldiers, and because the ocean storm came up, take whips with those soldiers, put them in the water, and they're going to whip the water 300 times. Literally. This guy's a little unhinged. Take hot iron, red hot iron pokers. This is historical. It's not from the Bible. And go and stick it into the water, so that the water will know that I'm in charge. I'm going to punish the water. Okay? I mean, to me, it's crazy, but it can also just be juvenile. Like kids could be, oh, bad water. You know, I mean, that's what I look at it like that. So this is the guy that Esther has to deal with. Get the context? So the whole 300 thing. I mean, and he does crazy things. He cuts people's heads off. He impales them, and he displays them, and all the stuff in the 300 and whatnot. We go like, oh my gosh, it's hard. I'm sorry, but it pales in comparison to the reality and stuff that happened. Remember, I keep saying this all the time? Man, you know what the most crazy movie would ever be? I think it would be like David and all his exploits, fighting Goliath, his story of his mighty men. One guy wipes out 500. That would be a movie. Instead of the 300, it would be the one, or something. I guess we had a movie like that with Jet Li or whatever. But anyway. Some of you guys know that? Oh, I thought that was David. But it would be like crazy stuff. I mean, we're talking about Superman and all these like Marvel. All that pales in comparison to some of these crazy heroes and, just people that were back in the day. I mean, I can't imagine. We're like, for me, one of my favorite TV shows, American Ninja Warrior, like, those guys are studs. I mean, if I ever saw Data, I'd be like, wow. When I go to heaven, I'm like, man, that's going to be pretty cool. I just want to see what it's like, That's my bloodthirsty stuff, and we get all that out of the system. Then we come to Esther. So here's King Xerxes. Mordecai knows this. Everybody knows this. Haman knows this. Esther knows this. They know what kind of guy this guy is. And so Haman insinuates his ways and says, there's a people that are causing problems in your empire. And he says, ooh, it's these Jews with their beliefs in one God and all these things. And he says, oh. And so he plots to get the king on his side to wipe out, and they send out a decree. And so the way you understand decrees is once the decree is sent out, even the king can't undo it, because he can't go back on his word. So the decree is, on such and such a date, we're going to set it up. All the people around, if you go and kill a Jew, there will be no repercussions, and you can take their possessions, their land, their wives, their children, whatever. So the whole empire, the Jews know this. On this date, it's a lawlessness. I'm sorry, so many of the movies nowadays, I wonder if people are reading the Bible, right? I mean, think about, okay, I'm not even going to mention it, but you can already imagine some of the movies that came out that have some of these kinds of implications. And so this date will be set, and for that day, you can just go and just kill Jews and no problem. So that's what Haman sets up. Mordecai finds out. But before that, you have to understand that God sovereignly sets up Mordecai, saves the king's life because he overhears a conspiracy. Because he's the father of Esther, he's allowed into the outer part of the palace, and somehow he hears. And I almost feel like it's because these guys, the doorkeepers of the king, that get angry with the king and want to kill him, sees that he's a Jew ethnically. And they treat him like a dog. Like, who cares if he hears? What can he do? Do you guys understand? He's just invisible to them. So he reports it. He tells it through Esther because they don't know that this Jew is the father of the queen. It's in there. And he finds out. Investigate. Those guys get beheaded. There's a lot of killing in Esther. And what kings did those days, where anyone that was loyal or did him a good turn, they would lavishly reward them. But somehow this gets forgotten because all the battle stuff that's going on, king's attention is taken, but it's all written down. And so later on, Haman gets it, all the plot, everything's all set, and everything's going, and then Mordecai finds out about that and talks to Esther, and so what are we going to do? And so then Esther says, okay, I'm going to go in, and she goes in, and what happens is the king extends the scepter and says, what would you want? He's so pleased with her, I'll give you up to half my kingdom. It's a hyperbole, but he's saying up to half the Persian Empire I'll give to you. He's just a very extreme guy. So she says, well, why don't you and Haman, the king's favorite, come to a banquet I'll set up? So they come. Haman's all great. He's like, oh man, me and the king and the queen, I'm up there. I got you. And he goes into this private dinner with her. And for some reason, she doesn't say it at that time. Maybe the timing's not right. I don't know. The Bible doesn't say. So she said, and he says, so what is it that you want up to half of the kingdom? He says it again. And she says, oh, can you come back tomorrow? Many of you might have missed this in the book of Esther if you read it. And so something's not right. They all go back, and the king goes, okay. Haman goes back, and then he finds out that Mordecai is Mordecai and Esther is Esther, and then his wife says, this plan that you made, it's going to fall in on you. And he's like starting to get scared. And then that same night, the king can't sleep. So he says, I need some entertainment. Bring those and the annals and chronicles of stuff that's happened, and they happen to open up the book, the rolls or whatever, scrolls, and they open up, and you know what happens? They read about Mordecai and how he saved his life by exposing the plot. And then he says, so what was done for this man? You got to change this. So the next morning he calls in Haman. He says, Haman, what should be done for the man that the king delights in? And Haman thinks, oh, wait a minute, okay, maybe it is good for me. And he says, well, I would take him on the king's horse, and a prince, a high noble of the king, should lead him around and say, this is what is done, and give him high honor, and everybody should bow down. This is what's done, thinking that's good for him. And he says, great idea. Get Mordecai, put him on a horse, and you lead him around. That's what happens. Now he's ruined. That's what his wife's saying. You did it. Then they come back to the banquet, and he's just kind of, or maybe still in shock. But he doesn't know, oh, I'm sorry. He knows about Mordecai, but he doesn't know that Mordecai and Esther are father. But at the banquet, king asks again, but this time Esther says, I do have a request. For some reason, she didn't say it until God gave that restlessness to King Xerxes. And everything's all lined up. And somehow she just, by God's grace, she times it right. And what happens is, she now exposes the pot of Haman. The king in his rage says, what? And he's like, but here's the problem. He already made that edict, and so he can't undo it. So he goes out, I don't know why he goes out, but he goes out. And then Haman, and of course this is just like a movie plot, he falls at her feet, grabbing her feet, begging her, to not let him live. And the king comes back in at that time and says, are you now attacking the queen in my very presence? And the gallows that Haman had actually prepared for Mordecai to be hung on, 70 feet high. Just go hang him on those gallows right now. And that's how he dies. So how does the Israelites get saved? Well, the idea comes up that the Jews can fully defend themselves on that day. And the king will back them with his soldiers. But still, some people are bold enough to attack, so there is some battle, and there are deaths. But the Israelites are not like that. Okay, that's the whole story, and I've run out of time, but there's one thing that I want to mention as we wrap up, and it's this. And I'm sorry, I have all these things that I want to point out, but I don't have the time for it. But I just want you guys, if you want, our note takers, there's 4 characteristics of Esther that are just so amazing that if you dig a little bit, you'll find. And I'll just give it to you from 2 perspectives. If you have daughters, you definitely want these characteristics to be forefront in their life. And sons too, I mean in a masculine way, but you want these characteristics to be there. You know why? Because this is more important than physical beauty. Esther had it. But it was these other characteristics. See, in a nation like empire, like the Persian Empire, where they potentially had 10 to 20 million women in that age range, and to pick 400, what we hear from ancient sources, pick 400 maidens out of about 10 million, there's going to be a lot of beautiful women there, physically at least. And then to pick Esther, I don't think it was just because of her physical beauty. I'm sorry, I mean, I'm not trying to be mean-spirited, but even for the most, whatever of us, if you had 400 of the best chefs in the world with 400 of the meals, like their best dish and everything, that kind of food that you like, and you took 1 spoonful of each one, you wouldn't get through it all. I'm guaranteeing you that. They'll just be like, oh yeah, that smells good. I'm sorry, but even with King Xerxes, he's just gonna be like, oh, okay. So there was something about Esther. I don't know if she was number 1 or number 400 or somewhere in between. I don't know. But when she came up, it was like something happened. And of course, it's part of the sovereignty of God. But there's some characteristics in it. And so, single men also. Physical beauty, okay, that's great. You should be attracted to her. But you should look for these characteristics. And these are things that we need to instill and teach. Number 1. Grace. Grace. People don't understand what grace is, though, nowadays. When we say someone's graceful or gracious, I have yet to meet a young man who says, oh my gosh, this girl, I met her, I think I'm going to marry her. Oh, what is it about her? She has such grace. You know why? Because that's not in their vocabulary. They may actually even notice it, but they can't describe it. You know what grace is? I have a couple of graces in our congregation. You know what grace is? And this is why your name is so amazing. Here's what grace is. It is not just physical beauty or just she moves so poetically like a dancer. No. But grace is this. Grace is the ability to make the other person feel like they're important. It's this ability that comes that gives dignity to anybody, whether they're homeless and poor, or whether they're the highest up. Do you guys see that? That's what grace is. And so sometimes I get some of these guys, and I get them to talk a little bit more, and what I realize is they've seen grace. All her friends like her. She's really popular. Not popular in the wrong way. Do you see what I'm talking about? Everybody likes her. Well, why does everybody like someone? Why does she find favor to the king? And before she even gets to the king, these 400 maidens are taken, and there's a guy that's in charge of all of them. And do you know that for 1 year they get treatments? I don't know what kind of treatments. They're trained, they're taught, they're dressed, all these things. But she's the favorite among all of them. That's what Esther says. The book of Esther says. And I think one of the reasons is because she has grace. And how do we know she has grace? Because when she says let's fast, she does the same thing. She says, I'm the queen, so I can't fast, all of you fast. Anybody that puts that distance, we don't find as attractive. Who's too stuck up, we say, right? Or hoity-toity. But the person of grace doesn't look at color, situation, poverty, education, whatever, but they look at you as a person. This is a characteristic all of us should have, but there are women that exude this. Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you ever met some women where, maybe it's usually the older women, but they're now grown into that grace, and you can just kind of feel very comfortable with them from the get-go because you feel accepted. One of my friends, he's kind of notorious at taking photos with famous people. So, I mean, and I said, why do you do that? Why do you, hunt up? And he's a pastor as well, too. And he gave me this really cool insight because he said, he's an extrovert, but he says, I want to see what their character is like. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, at one time he saw this actor who was in the middle of shooting a commercial, and out in like Santa Monica or something like that. And he just, he goes, hey, whatever his name was, I don't remember. And he said, can I take a photo with you afterwards? And he interrupted, and he did it on purpose. This guy's just a little bit out there, but he's a friend. And the guy, if you're, you can be like that, right? He says, let's do it right now. Come on over. And he said, he didn't say grace, but that's a guy with grace. Do you see what I'm talking about now? Politicians have fake grace, kiss babies, take photos with you. But I want to know people with real grace. Do you see? Esther, I don't think because she became queen, was like, I'm too good for you now. She still interacts with her uncle. Do you know that when he found out about the plot against the Jews, he ripped off his clothes? That's the way that the Jews do. And they put on sackcloth, which is very scratchy clothes, and ashes, and he was kind of weeping and mourning. And when she found out, she sent royal clothes to, really comfortable, and saying, Uncle, what's wrong? Dad, what's wrong? Sometimes people forget, even family, even friends, when they get up. Okay, second thing, I can go on and on, but I don't. No, second thing, here's another word. Poise. Do you know what poise means? You know what? I'm sorry, I should taught etiquette class. I should taught a manners class. It's funny because one of my good friends, he's about 10 years older than me, but he sent his son to charm school. And I just so laughed when I heard of charm school. And his son's name is James. And I said, charm school? And then he came back. Oh my gosh. Man, I got a crush on him. Oh my God. I was like, this. If I had daughters, I'd go, wow, this is the guy, And it was a good charm school, not a screwed up charm school, okay? But you know what they taught him? They taught him grace. I mean, it was superficial, but he already had a good sense of himself. But they taught him poise. Poise. Okay, let me bring it down to our kind of, because this is how I look at it too, and I know these are fictitious characters, but what do all our heroes today, especially the action heroes like James Bond, Jack Reacher, Bourne, what do they have? Poise. They're being shot at. Walk, faster, but they're not like this, They have poise. They're being shot at, they can die, but why do they have poise? Well, for those heroes, it's because I've been in this situation before. I know what I can do. I know what I've been trained. I have confidence. If you take that into the right context, into the Christian context of what we're supposed to know, and especially for women, I know this because I have daughters, but one of the things that women really need is poise. Not self-confidence, that's from the world. But confidence in God, knowing who you are as a beloved, beautiful, loved daughter of God. And that never let anybody say otherwise. Never let any man, any woman, society, any boss denigrate, lower you, or frazzle you. Whether they're a king or a queen or the president, or whether they're powerful or whether they're your boss, you know who you are and you say, no, that's wrong, that's right. You're unfrazzled. You're not awed by things out there, but rather you're awed by God and you know who you are. And so you carry yourself with poise in every circumstance, in every situation. Here, she's about facing death. She carries herself with poise. She says, okay, here's what we're going to do. She comes up with a plan. Her uncle's actually more frazzled. What are we going to do? And she says, look, here's the plan. Let's fast and pray. And last two are more simple, so I'll just go quickly. Grace and poise. I really want you guys to understand this, okay? Because I don't think we understand it, but those are great words. Courage. We all understand courage. She needs to have courage to be able to go into that. Courage, you've probably heard this definition before. It's not the lack of fear. It's doing something in spite of fear She's afraid that she might die, but she has a bigger value, a bigger purpose, and says, I'm going to do what's right. We need to raise up men and women and young women who do what's right, not what's convenient, not what's easy, not what's comfortable, not what's fun, but do what's right. That requires courage. I'm not going to go too much into that. You see it. She says, if I perish, I perish. I'll risk my life. And the final one is resolve. Resolve. Here's the problem with 3 days of fasting and praying. Have any of you guys done something where it's a big decision, you have 3 or 4 days? What do? You're not sure. Go back and forth. Back and forth. Sometimes I like it when I have less time for decisions, when I have a lot of time for decisions, because I go, oh. This is why the election, I almost wish I could just, have only like a day to decide instead of all this time. I watched every minute of every debate. I can never get those hours back, unfortunately. But resolve is when you make your mind up, you say, here's my core beliefs, and I will act according to that, even when I feel emotionally this way, or against it, or for or back and forth. There are times where you want to do something. There's times when you don't want to do something. In every marriage, there's times where you're like, I don't give up. It requires resolve, because you know that, no, this is a commitment to this person that I love. Now we can make it, because I know God's ways. There's times when you want to compromise your morals or your values, or no, even if it's uncomfortable, it's right. It requires you. Let us put these into our own lives, but let's especially make sure that we model it, but also put it into the lives of our men, especially grace, poise, courage, resolve. All of those I find in Esther. Read the book and know the historical background. If you have time, go read the 10 chapters. It doesn't take very long, but I think you'll see much more in this book than you have before, because maybe you have a little more historical context. But man, to me, it blows me away. And I said, Lord, if my daughters can have this kind of character, I'll be happy. I'll be satisfied, because I know I can send them out into the world to face it. My sons, I don't have it either. If our church members, if I too